Welcome back, night wanderers, to Nakora Nights. Park rangers walk deeper into the wilderness than anyone else. They know the trails, the ridgelines, the hidden lakes, and the things that move in the woods when they're supposed to stay still. But even they will tell you there are places in the parks they won't go alone. Tonight, we're diving into 10 true park ranger horror stories. Real encounters from the men and women whose job is to protect the forest. Even when the forest feels like it's watching them, creatures seen between trees that disappear the moment you call them in campsites found abandoned, but still warm, and voices on the radio, coming from rangers who aren't on duty anymore. These aren't campfire tales. These are the stories rangers whisper only to each other, and never to the tourists. Before we step into the dark together, tell me, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it where you are? Because if it's late, you might hear the woods differently tonight. If you're ready for the truth the park brochures never mention, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. I hear the forest. Now, tighten your backpack straps, keep your flashlight pointed forward, and don't answer if you hear your name being called. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing True Park Rangers Horror Stories. Let's begin. I never thought the forest could change a person the same way a battlefield changes a soldier. Yet the place they stationed me at did things to my mind that I still cannot explain. People talk about wilderness like it is peaceful, a quiet escape from the world, but they never mention the nights when the trees breathe like something alive, or the way silence can turn sharp enough to cut into your thoughts. Months ago, I was just another rookie ranger fresh out of academy training, convinced that helping my uncle run his logging equipment since childhood meant I understood what hard work was. This new posting would make me stronger, they said, would shape me into someone who could keep visitors safe. They never warned me that some things break down deeper than bones, and some people use these lonely places to do whatever their twisted mind wants. My name is Damon Lake, and before I ever put on a ranger badge, I lived in a small desert town where bad things stayed out in the open. I learned early that trouble is easier to handle when you can see it coming from half a mile away. But when I transferred to Greywater National Reserve, tucked deep between endless crowded pines, trouble learned to hide in the dark spaces where your flashlight never reaches. I thought I was ready for anything, but I still wake up drenched in sweat, hearing footsteps on concrete somewhere behind me, the same way they sounded back then, whenever the clock would creep close to midnight. Our lead ranger was Captain Rowan, a man who had been posted here for 16 years when I joined the team that September. He carried himself like someone carved out of stone, stiff posture, no wrinkle out of place on his uniform, and a stare that made you check your boots to be sure they were tied right. Everyone respected him instantly, the way you respect someone who can teach you everything you are supposed to know, someone who could probably hike a mountain backward in the dark without breaking stride. During the day, he acted strict but fair, pushing us hard within the training guide we all knew by heart. He spoke calmly, moved calmly, almost like he had two versions of himself, and only one of them was allowed out under sunlight. The rangers admired him, even the older ones who had worked with him for years. They asked him advice on handling difficult hikers or dealing with early snowstorms. But sometimes, when his radio chirped at certain hours, their eyes shifted to the floor, like they were waiting for something they hated but had agreed to live with. It started so small you could miss it if you were not paying attention. One morning during wildfire equipment drills, Ranger Derek Halley dropped a hose coupling right in front of Rowan. It clanged against the concrete and echoed through the station yard. Rowan's face changed, not the normal frustration any leader would show, but something colder, more personal. That night around 2:13 a.m., when most of us were already in our bunks inside the ranger dorm, Rowan stepped into the doorway and said Halley's name without emotion, told him to gear up and meet him behind the old maintenance shed on the far edge of the base. Extra nighttime drills were normal enough on paper. We thought nothing of it until Haley dragged himself back hours later, barely able to walk, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. He climbed into his bunk fully dressed and faced the wall. When someone asked what happened, he whispered that Rowan was helping him get better, that he deserved the correction. That was the first night, and after that, the pattern crawled through our building like a sickness no one wanted to name. If you made a mistake during the day, a real mistake that Rowan noticed, you could expect that late-night visit. The chosen ranger would put on their gear in silence while the rest of us pretended to sleep, though every one of us was wide awake listening to the slow footsteps fade down the hall. They would return long after, limping, clutching ribs, or shaking like they had been forced to stand in snow for hours, always with that same empty look. We whispered in the shower stalls where water beat against tile, hoping the noise drowned out our fear. We called them correction sessions. The name felt small compared to what those nights did to people. One ranger, Miles Jennings, tried to refuse once. He said he would go to district headquarters about it, but Rowan smiled in that empty way he did and reminded him that stepping outside the chain of command was a serious violation. And besides, who would believe a struggling rookie over a decorated captain with a flawless record? My turn came on a cold Wednesday in October, about 7 weeks into my assignment. During search and rescue exercises earlier that day, I hesitated to throw a signaling flare because for 1 second, its weight made me imagine what real emergencies must feel like. Rowan saw the hesitation. He made a note on his clipboard. I knew what waited for me. Close to midnight, I heard those unmistakable footsteps. They always sounded measured, as if he enjoyed each quiet echo. When he stood in the doorway, the emergency lights behind him gave him a long shadow, and he didn't need to say my name, just pointed at me and then at the exit. My hands were numb while I put my gear on, and I followed him outside into the cold air where even the crickets had stopped singing, like they wanted no part of what was coming. He led me behind maintenance cabin 12, an old timber structure leaning against a line of tall pines. Everything around it felt wrong, in a way I can't explain. The door was always locked from the inside, even though no one had used that cabin in decades. Everyone knew the story, but no one talked about it. The tale about a ranger who locked himself in years ago and never came out. Rowan never let us near it. Yet that night he took me right behind it, where the dirt clearing had no grass left, like countless bodies had crawled across it for years. He started with push-ups. Normal enough, except he made me keep my feet balanced on an old toolbox while he pressed his boot between my shoulder blades. With each push-up, he added more pressure until my arms trembled so violently that the dirt underneath my hands felt like it was moving. When I collapsed, he yanked me up by my collar, his grip crushing against my throat. He said weakness like mine put people in body bags, said he would fix me whether I liked it or not. For the next 4 hours, he made me hold positions until my joints locked in place. He forced me to crawl across the cold ground while he kicked my ribs whenever I slowed down. He made me stand still while he screamed questions inches from my face, demanding to know why someone like me thought I deserved a badge. The worst part wasn't the pain. I can take pain. It was the way he knew exactly how far to go without leaving marks that would raise suspicion. A strained muscle here, a rib that hurt too much to cough, but nothing a supervisor could not explain away. He had practiced this, perfected it. When he finally let me go, he grabbed my face, fingers digging into my jaw, and told me this was between us, that I should be grateful for special attention. Then he said something even colder, something that froze my blood. He mentioned a ranger from the earlier training cycle who had filed a complaint once. And wasn't it sad how that ranger had slipped during a solo hike and broken his leg so badly he had to be discharged early? 3 days later, everything changed. We were doing a missing person search when Rowan took Ranger Niren out behind cabin 12 again. Only this time, Niren didn't come back. He collapsed during the session, and from what we heard later through a medic who owed someone a favor, he suffered kidney damage from dehydration and blunt trauma. The official report said he overexerted himself during voluntary practice. They moved him out of the area before sunrise. His bunk was cleared before breakfast, his name removed before lunchtime. That was when the whispers turned into real conversations. We compared notes when we cleaned equipment, our voices low and tight with fear. One ranger remembered his older brother mentioning a dangerous captain out here years ago who did private training behind old buildings. Another had heard rumors from hikers who said the fire tower radios sometimes whispered names at night, even though the system was offline. What twisted my stomach was when Ranger Foster, whose cousin worked in district administration, told us that Rowan had help. 3 senior officers knew exactly what was happening behind cabin 12. They had moved Rowan between ranger stations, always before complaints built up too much. Foster said his cousin saw requisition orders for medical supplies sent directly to cabin 12, things that never showed an official record. Bandages, ice packs, painkillers. Enough to patch rangers up, just enough to make it through morning patrol. We tried to be careful. We took photos of bruises in the mirror using a contraband phone someone hid behind a ventilation grate. Foster kept a notebook with dates and names inside his pillowcase, but Rowan seemed to feel something shifting. His eyes started scanning rooms differently. He began calling several rangers at once for sessions, making us watch each other suffer, forcing us to participate, turning us against one another so none of us could trust the next person. One night, he had 5 of us out there. When Ranger Reed refused to push his knee into another ranger's back like Rowan ordered, Rowan made us crawl on our elbows through freezing mud until Reed finally obeyed, tears running down his face while the other ranger gasped under him. The breaking point came during week 9 when Foster marched straight to the regional investigative office. He carried the notebook, the phone, and fresh bruises. He didn't tell us he was going. Maybe he knew we would stop him. Maybe he knew Rowan was watching us too closely. 8 hours later, Foster was gone. They claimed he had a sudden family emergency. That night, Rowan called our unit into formation by the flagpole. His hands were behind his back, his voice calm. He talked about how some rangers make up stories when they cannot handle the pressure, never saying Foster's name but making sure we understood the warning. We all stood in silence, our nerves stretched thin as wire. No one was taken out for correction sessions that night, but no one slept. But Foster had been smarter than any of us realized. Before going to the investigative office, he mailed copies of all our evidence to his father, a retired command sergeant major with connections far above this forest. 2 weeks later, Greywater Reserve filled with investigators from outside the region, people Rowan could not intimidate. They interviewed each of us, and for the first time, someone wrote down what we said in official reports that could not disappear. Rowan was removed from duty. Watching him leave in plain clothes instead of his perfect uniform felt like seeing a beast lose its claws. Major Huxley resigned silently. Lieutenant Colonel Merrow was transferred to an office where he could not harm anyone. 3 other officers were exposed. The investigation found 16 years of incidents, hundreds of rangers who had gone through those sessions. Some came forward from other parts of the country, men and women who still woke up shaking from nightmares of correction grounds. They treated all of us, physically and psychologically. I spent months in therapy, learning how to sleep again without hearing those footsteps. I finished my service with a different team, became a ranger the way it was supposed to happen, but the forest still clings to me. When I walk past an abandoned cabin, especially one with the door locked from the inside, my breath catches. When I stay overnight at the fire tower and hear my name whispered through static at 2:43 a.m., even though the department says the radios are offline, I freeze in place. And when I search for missing hikers and see a figure standing by the tree line but find only freshly disturbed soil when I reach the spot, I feel my chest tighten the same way it did behind cabin 12, because I know now that monsters wear uniforms. They smile at you during daylight. They teach you how to survive while quietly destroying you piece by piece, and the forest becomes part of their silence. Sometimes, when wind moves through the pines in a strange way, I swear I hear Rowan's bootsteps behind me again. Sometimes I turn around, and sometimes I don't. I did not expect the weight on my shoulders to follow me this far into the mountains, yet every step I took reminded me that I carried too much. It started with the heavy pack rubbing against my back, stuffed with medical gear and safety tools. The department insisted we carry, and somehow it still never felt like enough for whatever waited in the woods. I had been a park ranger at Ridgewalk National Forest for almost a month, living inside a wooden outpost carved into the mountainside like some forgotten barn swallowed by pines. The place stared down 3 scattered logging villages that never asked for our help. Small clusters of homes where smoke curled slowly out of chimneys and faces, peeked through thin curtains whenever our trucks passed. The department called this place a conservation support zone, a friendly name made in an office far away from the cold wind that scraped across our cabins like claws. Up here at 7,000 feet, where the gusts could peel bark off dying spruce and the locals watched us like they expected us to vanish any moment, those words meant something different. I was 3 years out of Ranger medical training, fresh from my time at North Haven Field Institute, and somehow I ended up here, pretending to be the calm and confident medic of a teen that insisted the forest was safe. My friends back home were posting pictures of their new apartments, making jokes about traffic, sharing videos of their cats. My supervisor here carried a worn rifle and liked to read missing person files while sharpening his hunting knife. Ranger Captain Walters ran Ridgewalk Station with perfect order, which should have comforted me, but only made something in my chest tighten. Every morning, he would stand in front of the main cabin fireplace with a clipboard, repeating the same goals, the same routine, the same careful smile. Community outreach, trail safety checks, wildlife tracking, all said in a rehearsed tone like we were running a camping store instead of a lonely outpost in the middle of endless dark trees. My clinic cabin was supposed to be the pride of the station, proof that we offered care, not fear. During my first weeks, that dream held up. I treated hikers with altitude headaches, climbers with sprained ankles, kids who visited the station during school projects and scraped their knees on the rocks. I wrapped the broken wrist of an old logger who slipped near a ravine and helped a woman who got sick after drinking from a stream heavy with silt. Walters would step in each evening, reviewing my patient log with careful nods, reminding me to document everything with accuracy because the reports went straight to headquarters. Then, everything changed on a Tuesday night in week 4. I was counting supply packets for the third time, trying to figure out why our inventory always seemed off, when a loud pounding echoed outside the station gate. 2 rangers, Towers and Bell, were dragging someone through the snow. At first glance, I thought it was one of ours, the way they carried him between their shoulders, but as they moved closer into the lantern glow, I saw a local man, his clothing ripped and covered in dark earth. His skin was pale, his lips trembling like he had run for miles or been dragged through the cold. They laid him on my table without saying why, and Towers simply muttered, "Fix him," before walking out, the door closing with a thud that felt too final. That was when I really looked. Thick rope burns wrapped around the man's wrists, cutting deep enough to leave swollen grooves. Bruises lined his ribs in patterns too neat, too rhythmic, too alike across both sides. Not the random marks from falling or running into branches, but the kind of organized impact you see from repeated hits with something long and flat. His breath was quick, too quick, trembling more from fear than pain. His eyes kept darting to the door like he expected whoever hurt him to burst inside. He wouldn't tell me his name, only whispered something in his language, trembling syllables that meant nothing to me but sounded like begging. When I cleaned his arms, I saw dirt under his nails, thick and black, like he had clawed through the ground or scraped against a stone wall. And on the back of his hand, someone had written a number with a marker. The number 17, written in a rushed hurry. I gave him water, watched it spill down his chin because his hands shook too much to steady the cup. When the pain medication started to work, he finally managed a few broken words. "Not hunter," he said, touching his chest. "Not trapper. Teacher. Just a teacher." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out an old ID card, the picture showing him smiling in front of a chalkboard full of neat handwriting. The difference between the smiling man and the terrified man on my table made my stomach twist. Before I could ask more, Sergeant Nolan appeared in the doorway. He was one of the senior rangers, a man with a stone jaw and a voice that always seemed disappointed. He told me the man was cleared to leave. I insisted he needed observation, possibly imaging for hidden fractures. Nolan stared at me with eyes that held nothing warm and said, "Captain Walters wanted the man gone before dawn." The teacher understood. His fear grew so sharp it filled the room like cold air. He jumped to his feet and stumbled out, and by the time I ran after him, he had disappeared into the trees. That should have been the moment I realized something was wrong, terribly wrong. But I told myself all the harmless things we say to stay sane. Maybe he fled something outside our control. Maybe our rangers found him already hurt. Maybe I was imagining patterns in bruises. Because the alternative meant everything we believed we protected here was a lie. But then Wednesday night came, and they brought 3 more. 3 different people, all injured in the same strange, careful ways, all with numbers inked onto their hands. 21, 32, 40, and one of them was just a teenager, maybe 15, with round burn marks on his shoulders that looked too perfect, too evenly spaced, as if metal warmed by something far too powerful had been pressed against him again and again. His uncle came with him, shaking violently, one shoulder dislocated and left hanging wrong, his hand marked with the number 100. The third was an old woman who could barely stand, who cried quietly, not from the bandaged cuts but from something deeper, something hollow inside her chest. I was tending to the boy's burns when Captain Walters walked in. He rarely came by after dark. He stood behind me like a shadow, arms behind his back, watching me rat the boy's skin with slow, careful movements. He said these people had been picked up during routine safety operations. He said they had been processed and cleared. He said my only job was to treat their injuries and write my notes. I kept staring at the gauze in my hands, then asked him how a routine safety sweep produced burns shaped like metal rings on a child. Walter stepped closer, close enough for me to smell the faint scent of gun oil mixed with pine sap on his uniform. "Ranger," he said, and the way he said my title felt like warning. "Keep to your tasks. These matters do not concern you." After he left, the teenager gripped my wrist hard enough to hurt. His uncle tried to hush him, but the boy leaned close and whispered in rushed English. "They take us at night," he said. "They come to houses, say we hide tools, hide traps. We hide nothing. My father gone 5 days ago. Number 1, never returned." His voice shook as he told me there was a room under the old schoolhouse by the lake, a place where people were taken for questioning, a place where numbers were written on hands so someone could track who talked and who stayed silent. I wanted to say our station would never do something like that, but the burns on his shoulders were too clean, too deliberate, too controlled to deny. That was the night something cold settled inside my ribs and stayed there. Thursday morning's briefing was the same as always. Walters reading off trail reports while the rest of us stood in stiff lines, pretending nothing in our world had shifted. I sat in the back staring at my cold coffee while the others nodded along. When the meeting ended, I followed Walters to his office and shut the door behind me. I started to ask him again about the injured locals. He cut me off with a raised hand. He told me they were threats identified through investigation. He told me the teacher had ties to outsiders trying to set illegal traps in the protected forest. He told me the teenager's uncle was connected to known offenders. He told me they used pressure to get information needed to protect families from accidents or attacks. He said all this without looking up from his laptop. He sounded rehearsed. Then he finally looked up. And when his eyes met mine, they were calculating, like he was doing quiet math and I was an error he needed to erase. He said I was young. He said I was a good medic, maybe one of the best who had come to Ridgewalk. He said my reports were thorough. And then he told me I did not understand the hard choices needed to maintain order in a wilderness this unforgiving. He opened a thick folder on his desk and tapped it with 2 fingers. "Everything we do here is to prevent tragedies," he said, "keeping hikers safe, stopping dangerous individuals before someone gets hurt." I left the office knowing 2 things. 1, whatever was happening would not stop. 2, I had become a problem. That night, sleep would not come. The wind rattled the windows and every sound made my chest tighten. I kept thinking of the numbers, of the way each person stared at the door as if expecting someone worse to appear. Around 2:30 hours, I heard engines rumbling away from the outpost. The sound of trucks heading toward the valley. I knew exactly what that meant. I got out of bed and started preparing my station, hands shaking as I laid out gauze, antiseptic, painkillers, suture kits. Leading my thoughts through routine was the only way to breathe. By 4:20, headlights appeared through the snow. They brought 7 people this time. Numbers written on their hands from 101 through 107. Among them was a child no older than 10. His hand marked with number 104. His paperwork listed suspected messenger behavior. His pupils were uneven, his gaze dull, the signs of a concussion caused by blows far too strong for his small body. While I checked his skull for fractures, Walters appeared again. But this time he was not alone. He brought Master Ranger Creed, a man I rarely saw except during major incidents, a man who had been at Ridgewalk for more than 15 years. His expression held nothing human, just a cold stare that came from decades of seeing mountains swallow people whole. Creed rested his hand on his holstered weapon like he always did. Walters told me they needed to discuss my performance. His voice was calm, but the air felt wrong. He told me my rotation ended in 6 days, that I would join the supply convoy back to Brightfall, then return home for leave. The way he said home made the skin on my neck prickle, like he was dangling escape in front of me, like he expected silence in return. Creed shifted, his hand still on his weapon, and the message was clear. They had 6 days to decide if I was going to stay quiet or disappear in the forest like so many who came before. The boy on my table whimpered, trying to sit. Walters glanced at him, then looked back at me with a strange calm. "Convoys can be dangerous," he said. "Slippery roads, falling rocks. Out here, things happen. People do not always make it back." The threat was not subtle. It was a warning wrapped in gentle words. After they left, I finished treating the boy and the others in silence. While I cleaned my tools, I felt something crawl through my mind, the feeling that no matter what I did, I had already stepped on a path I could not escape. I made it through the next 6 days by shutting down something inside me, by writing reports with neutral words that felt like lies, by avoiding Creed's stare whenever he passed. On the morning of day 7, I climbed into the convoy truck heading toward Brightfall. I looked back at the station perched on the ridge, the building shrinking as we drove away, and 2 weeks later, I was home. I never filed any report, never spoke up. The mission logs claim peaceful months, helpful service, safe trails. Sometimes, late at night, I search for news about the villages near Ridgewalk. But there is nothing, no missing people, no signs of what happened, no numbers. Except the ones I still see when I close my eyes. 104, 117. And all the ones after that, still growing somewhere deep in the woods. I thought the story ended there, but it did not. Not truly, because something followed me home. It started with the stacked stones. Back at my new ranger post far away from Ridgewalk, small piles of rocks began appearing outside the doors each morning. Carefully balanced stacks, each one a different shape, never repeating, never the same height. The older rangers joked about hikers leaving them as a prank. But I knew better. I knew those stacks were warnings or messages or signals, things meant for me and me alone. Then came the call from a terrified hiker near the old marsh. He said someone was following him. When our team went to investigate, we found only one single footprint in the mud, one print facing the opposite direction of any trail. Wrong, impossible. Impossible, like the person stood backward while walking forward. Then a campsite was found near the ridge. The tea was still hot, the blankets warm, a flashlight running, but no one there. Not a single sign of struggle, not a single trail in the snow. Just warmth with no people. Just like Ridgewalk. And some nights, when I cannot sleep, I hear tapping on my cabin wall. Soft taps, 3 at a time. Pause, then 3 more. Exactly like the pattern Creed used when checking doors in the basement room by the lake. I try telling myself it is branches moving in the wind. But the trees here do not reach that high, and the taps always come from outside the window near my bed. Always at the same time, 2:43 a.m. 6 days, 6 warnings, 6 taps, just like before. One evening, while sorting medical records in my new clinic space, I found a slip of paper I did not write. It lay between 2 folders like someone tucked it there by hand. A single number written in faded ink, a number I had not seen since leaving Ridgewalk. A number that should not exist in this forest. 108. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the same cold dread that filled me the night the trucks came for those people. The same dread that made my breath slow, made my ribs tighten, made the world feel thin around me. I think they found me. Or maybe they never stopped watching. Maybe the forest carried them here. Maybe the trees remember everything we try to bury. Tonight, I am writing this from my cabin table. The lantern flickers. The forest outside is too quiet. I have packed a small bag with the gear I always thought would protect me. But I know better now. Nothing protects you from something you helped hide. The tapping just started again. 3 knocks, pause. 3 more. They are closer than before. My breath is shaking so badly I can barely keep the pen steady. I can see the outline of a figure standing beyond the glass now, a faint shadow where no one should be. The number 108 is still on the table next to me. Maybe I will answer the door. Maybe I will run into the forest. Maybe the woods will swallow me like they did everyone else. I do not know. All I know is that numbers always come in order. And mine has finally arrived. I always believed I understood fear, but I was wrong. My name is Mason Hale, and before everything collapsed around me, I worked as a park ranger in the Silver Cross National Preserve, a stretch of deep forest and broken mountains where people vanished more often than storms rolled in. I took the job because I loved the quiet, the sense of purpose, the idea that I was helping protect both nature and the people wandering through it, but mostly because I was running from the world I grew up in. I had been a firefighter before. A job that ended after a warehouse collapse took half my crew and left me crawling through smoke begging the dark not to take me too. I thought the forest would be gentler, safer, cleaner. I thought wrong. I learned the woods have their own kind of smoke, their own kind of dark, and they do not care how many years of service or scars you carry. They take what they want. The truth is, nothing about Silver Cross ever felt normal, not from my first week. The trees grew too close, the wind carried voices that sounded too human, and the trails never looked the same way twice. The veterans warned me to trust my compass more than my eyes, but one of the first things I discovered was that compasses spun here like the needle was drunk. People laughed about it, called it a magnetic anomaly, but the laughter always sounded thin, like everyone was pretending it was fine. And maybe it was, until the night everything changed for me. It started with a notebook. A small spiral journal soaked by rain, lying by itself beside an old logging road. I picked it up because lost items often belong to missing hikers. The first page was empty, the second page too. Then on the third page, written in shaky black ink, was a single sentence that made my skin tighten. If you are reading this, stop whistling. I froze because I had not been whistling. No ranger nearby had been whistling. No wind had made any sound close to whistling. And yet there was the warning, as if written by someone who knew something I did not. I stared at the sentence, waiting, listening to the quiet. The forest held its breath with me, and I set the notebook aside, making a mental note to log it later. That should have been the first sign to turn around and run away from the life I had just chosen. But I shrugged it off, because rangers see strange things. People leave behind diaries full of nonsense when they panic in the woods. People think the wind is following them. People imagine voices calling their names. Or so I believed then. Some weeks later, a child went missing. A boy named Evan, 8 years old, last seen at a campground near Hollow Ridge. His parents said he had gone to gather pine cones by the tree line and never came back. These cases tear you open inside because children do not last long in the wild. Not with the cold nights and the cliffs and the wildlife. Every ranger drops everything and runs toward the search zone. You do not think about yourself. You think about finding the small life out there who might be curled under a tree waiting for help. I was assigned the southern sweep of the ridge. My partner that day, Ranger Callum Price, walked beside me calling the boy's name, while I listened for any movement or cry. That is when we heard it. Someone calling Evan's name from deep in the woods, but the tone was too calm, too steady, almost like a reading rather than calling for a missing kid. We rushed toward the sound, crashing through brush, only to hear the voice again from the opposite direction, then again from behind us. Then again from somewhere above, like the mountainside itself was saying the name, Evan, 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 Evan. Every few seconds the direction changed. the voice never sounded frightened. It sounded rehearsed. Callum and I stopped moving. We stared into the forest, our breaths turning shallow, because neither of us wanted to say it out loud, but both of us knew something was wrong. Humans cannot throw their voice across miles of trees. Humans cannot speak from more than one place at once. We called back, telling whoever it was to identify themselves, but the voice ignored us, repeating the boy's name over and over until it faded into the distance like a radio turning down. We never found Evan. Search crews combed the ridge for 2 weeks and found nothing except one small shoe left in the center of an open clearing, placed so neatly it looked staged. His parents left the park broken, and something inside me cracked too. Losing a child out there makes you question whether the forest is alive in a way you cannot understand. But all of that was still nothing compared to what happened next. It was late autumn when I joined a patrol heading toward the Northern Valley, an area where reports had come in about strange lights flickering after dark. People said the flashes looked like someone signaling for help, but every time rangers checked, they found no one. My supervisor sent me and 2 others, Carter and Lynn, to investigate. We hiked for 3 hours through thick pine forest until we reached the valley rim. Night was already creeping in, and the wind carried the dry smell of old leaves. We saw the first flash far below us, a faint blinking light, like a flashlight being turned on and off. Then the light became steady, blinking in a pattern, 3 short flashes, 2 long, 3 short again. Morse code for distress. We hurried down the slope with our radios ready. The light vanished once as we approached, then reappeared deeper in the trees. We ran faster, pushing through branches. The blinking stopped again. When we reached the spot where the light had been, we found nothing except a single flashlight stabbed halfway into the ground, like someone forced it there with unnatural strength. The button was still on. The beam pointed straight into the soil, illuminating nothing but dirt. No footprints. No broken branches. No sign of struggle. Nothing. My heart thumped so loud I swore I could hear it echo in my ears. I reached for the flashlight, hesitating before touching it, because something felt wrong. The metal casing was warm, too warm, as if a hand had just been gripping it. Carter looked at me and shook his head slowly, knowing I felt the same thing. Someone had been here. Someone had been signaling, but that someone did not want to be found. All these strange events built up like a storm gathering in my bones. But the night everything shattered for me, the night that chased me out of my job and my sanity, came during a routine check of an abandoned ranger station deep on the west side of the preserve. The old Wicklow station had been closed for years due to structural decay and sightings of dangerous wildlife nearby. But lately, hikers kept reporting lights moving around inside. Some said they heard people speaking. Others said they saw shadows pacing in broken windows. My supervisor asked me and 2 other rangers, Jonas Reed and Mila Tanner, to hike out there and make sure no squatters were living inside. We left at dusk because we wanted to reach the station before full dark. The trail toward Wicklow was steep and twisted through thick forest, where the temperature always dipped lower than the surrounding areas. Jonas took point, I followed, and Mila stayed in the rear. Fog drifted between the trees, curling around our boots, and the air felt unusually heavy, like it was trying to press us back the way we came. By the time the roof of Wicklow came into view, night had swallowed nearly everything. The old station sat crooked on a slope, wooden walls sagging inward, windows shattered like broken teeth. We approached slowly. There were no lights on inside, nothing but darkness. I took a step forward and froze. Something was written on the door in charcoal strokes. No whistling. The notebook flashed in my mind so hard it made me stumble. I reached for my radio, hesitating before speaking. Jonas pushed the door open, letting it creak on rusty hinges. The inside smelled of mold and cold stone. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. Dust hung in the air. Nothing moved. We split up to search different rooms, each of us moving slowly, listening for intruders. I walked into what used to be the communications room. The equipment had long been torn out, leaving empty shelves and exposed wiring. The walls were covered in old maps, paper peeling from moisture. A draft crawled along my neck, though no window was open. Something crackled behind me. I turned. A radio on the floor sputtered to life, even though it looked like it had not worked in years. Static hissed, then a voice cut through, soft but unmistakably human, sounding like a whisper spoken right behind my ear. Mason. My stomach dropped. I stared at the radio, trying to steady my breathing. The voice came again, speaking my name with a tone that felt too familiar, like someone I used to know but could not place. Mason, come outside. I backed away and my heel struck something. I looked down and saw another notebook, identical to the first one I found weeks ago. The cover was torn. I picked it up and opened it. Every page was filled with one repeated sentence. If you hear your name in the woods, it is not calling you. My mouth went dry. The radio crackled again, and the voice changed. It sounded like Jonas now. Mason, I need backup. East door. Static. Then it sounded like Mila. Mason, please hurry. Static. Then it sounded like me. Mason, get outside. Static. I dropped the notebook. It hit the floor with a soft thump that seemed to echo. I ran toward the main hall to find Jonas and Mila, but the building suddenly felt wrong, the hallways longer, the rooms darker, as if the structure itself had shifted while I was inside. Jonas was nowhere. Mila was nowhere. My flashlight flickered, then steadied. My pulse hammered. I rushed outside thinking maybe they had gone around the station, but the porch was empty. Then I heard footsteps. Not one set, several. Moving with perfect rhythm just beyond the tree line. I raised my light, and my breath froze in my chest. 6 figures stepped out of the fog. All wore park ranger uniforms identical to ours. Same badges, same jackets, same boots. Even the same small tear on the sleeve I had in my own coat. The leader stepped forward. When the beam hit his face, I saw myself staring back. My own eyes, my own jaw, my own scars, my own expression twisted into something cold and wrong, like a reflection carved from ice. I staggered back. The others behind him looked like Jonas, like Mila, like other rangers I had known through the years, all wearing my uniform, all with faces that belonged to people I trusted, but eyes that held nothing human. My double lifted a hand and pointed at me. The others moved forward, silent, synchronized, stepping with unnatural precision. I ran. Panic pushed me through the trees. Branches clawed at my coat. The forest spun around me, every direction looking the same. I heard footsteps behind me, too steady, too fast. I glanced back once and saw them weaving through the trees without stumbling, moving like shadows that knew the land better than the land knew itself. I kept running until the ground vanished beneath me and I slid down a rocky slope, hitting dirt hard. My light spun out of my hand and landed several feet away. I crawled toward it, gripping the cold metal, then scrambled behind a fallen log. My breath came in sharp bursts. The forest fell silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. I waited. Minutes passed, no footsteps, no voices, nothing. I was about to move when a soft tapping came from the other side of the log, like someone was knocking gently on wood. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. I held my breath. The tapping stopped. Then a voice whispered through the darkness, using my call sign, using my tone, speaking like my own mouth was forming the words. Come on, Mason. You can stand up now. I did not move. I did not breathe. The voice repeated, sounding amused now. Come on, I know you can hear me. The tapping resumed, louder, harder. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying the forest would swallow me. Then the tapping stopped. Footsteps walked away, soft and deliberate, until the sound faded completely. I waited as long as I could, until the cold air stunned my lungs. Then I crawled from behind the log, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. I walked slowly in the direction I thought the trail was, though the trees kept shifting, narrowing, warping under the beam. I kept walking until dawn touched the sky with a faint blue light. My legs shook, my throat burned. My head rang. When I finally stumbled onto a dirt road, I collapsed. A rescue truck found me hours later. The paramedics said I looked like I had been running all night. My supervisor asked where Jonas and Mila were. I told him what I saw. He stared at me with an expression that said he did not believe me but did not want to say it. Then the reports came in. Jonas returned the next evening, walking alone out of the woods, uniform spotless, calm as if nothing had happened. He claimed he had never entered the station, said he had lost track of us and spent the night wandering. Mila arrived the next morning covered in scratches, mumbling about seeing herself die more than once. Rangers found a third figure matching Mila's description later that day, but when they went back to retrieve it, the body was gone. 3 rangers went into the woods. 4 rangers came back. No one talked about it. No one wanted to understand the math. We were separated immediately, sent to different stations across the state. The official report called it confusion caused by the terrain. They wrote it like a storybook lie tied neatly with a bow. But I know the truth. I know those things in the forest wore our faces. I know they could copy our voices. I know they moved like hunters who had been learning our patterns longer than we had been alive. Some nights I lie awake and wonder if I truly made it back, if the version of me sitting here writing this is the real Mason Hale, or if somewhere deep in Silvercross the real me is still running between the twisted trees begging the dark not to catch him. I keep checking my reflection for changes. I keep listening for footsteps that match mine too perfectly. I sleep with my back to the wall, and sometimes, late at night, I hear someone outside my window, tapping gently on the glass. 3 taps. Pause. Pause. 3 taps again, and a voice that sounds just like mine saying softly, "Come on, Mason." Stand up. I should have walked away the moment I heard the old ranger whisper that warning, but I was too stubborn to understand danger when it spoke right into my ear. I was standing outside the ranger station on my first day when the man everyone called Old Tanner limped toward me through the early fog. He stopped just inches from my shoulder, his breath shaking as he said, "Never return to Trail 47. After that, he shoved a rusted compass into my hand and walked away like something behind me was watching us. I told myself he was just a tired old ranger with too many years behind him, but every time I turned that compass over in my palm, I felt something cold crawling up my spine, something that made me wonder if I had just been handed a secret I was not supposed to know. I became a park ranger because it was the only job that made sense after I left the mountain rescue unit. Back then, my name was known only to the men I served with, men who carried ropes and stretchers into snowstorms while praying they would never have to bring a body back. My childhood home was a small town in northern Idaho where the forest never ended, and the only thing that changed with the seasons was the smell of the pines. My father worked logging until his hands could no longer hold an axe, and my mother cleaned motel rooms that smelled like wet carpet and cheap cigarettes. I was shaped by silence, by snow, by the sense that the trees always listened even when people did not. When I joined Mountain Rescue, I thought saving people would give my life meaning. But meaning turned into nightmares after the avalanche of 214, when 3 hikers were swallowed by white and only 1 came out breathing. Their families wrote me letters, thanked me, hugged me, but none of them understood the way the cold stayed in my bones long after the season changed. By the time I stepped away from the rescue unit, I felt like I had left pieces of myself in every valley we searched, pieces that would never come home. Becoming a park ranger in Ridgway National Forest was supposed to heal me. That was the plan. Watch the trails, keep campers safe, breathe clean air, sleep without hearing the wind sound like men calling for help. But Ridgway had a way of peeling back your skin and looking underneath, a way of making you feel small, unwelcome, marked. The rangers whispered about strange things when they thought no one knew was listening. Strange sounds, strange tracks, strange nights, and strangest of all, Trail 47. My name is Jonah Hale, and what I'm about to tell you is not the kind of story you forget. It's the kind that stains you, the kind that grows in every quiet moment, the kind that makes you wonder if the forest is still watching you even after you walk away. I am only telling it now because of what happened 2 nights ago when I got a call from my old rescue partner saying 2 rangers were in the hospital, and hearing his voice brought everything rushing back like a cold wind down my neck. I punched the wall so hard the plaster cracked before I knew what I was doing. Not because of the injuries, but because of the name he said right after, Major Mercer. The same man who destroyed lives at the training grounds years ago, The same man who now ran operations in our forest as if nothing had ever happened. The man who buried truth deeper than any grave. But my story doesn't begin with him. It begins with me standing on my first morning as a ranger, staring at the compass old Tanner forced into my hand. The compass needle spun even though there was no wind. It spun like something under the earth was pulling it in circles. Tanner muttered something about lost things, always trying to find a way back home, then disappeared into the trees. I tried to laugh it off. I tried to pretend I wasn't rattled, but something about Trail 47 kept tugging at my mind like a loose thread. The map showed it as a narrow old service trail that hadn't been maintained for almost 20 years, officially closed, unofficially ignored. Some rangers said it was shut down because of landslides, others said because of wildlife. But Tanner almost never talked, and when he did, he didn't lie. I spent the next few weeks learning my routine. Check station logs, patrol trails, warn hikers not to approach bears, make sure teenagers didn't sneak beer into the campgrounds. Just when I started to feel normal again, small things began happening. The kind of small things that feel too minor to report, too strange to ignore. One morning I fixed a wooden sign on Pine Needle Loop, a sign that pointed hikers toward the safer trail network. It took me 15 minutes to repair the screws and make sure the arrow pointed east. I walked away feeling proud of the simple task. The next morning, the sign was turned completely around, its arrow pointing west toward deeper woods. I told myself maybe a hiker had messed with it, but the screws I installed were tight, too tight for bare hands to loosen. I started carrying a small camera in my pocket, ready to catch whoever was messing with the signs. That was the first sign. The second sign was the silence. There was a part of the forest that rangers rarely talked about, a patch of trees near a dried creek bed. The moment you stepped into it, the world went still. No birds, no insects, not even wind, just heavy, pressing quiet. The first time I walked through it, my own breathing felt too loud. I lifted my boot and stepped on a dead branch, expecting the usual crack. But instead I heard two cracks, one after the other, just a fraction of a second apart, like something behind me was stepping the same way but slightly out of rhythm. I spun around. No one. Nothing. Just the trees staring back. More days passed. More strange moments. I felt watched, followed. The compass Tanner gave me started spinning whenever I carried it near Trail 47. At the station, the needle behaved fine. Out in the woods, it turned frantic. I stopped putting it in my pocket and instead carried it clipped to my belt. I thought maybe I'd catch the moment it pointed somewhere meaningful, but every time it calmed down, something cold brushed the back of my neck and the needle swung helpless again. 2 months into the job, everything changed. It began with a whisper on the radio. Static at first, then a voice counting numbers I didn't recognize. One of the other rangers, Harper, asked if it was me. I said no. The voice faded like it had sunk into the dirt. Later, we discovered the strange transmission had come from somewhere near Trail 47. I should have stayed away. Everyone told me to. Even the supervisor, a man named Briggs, told us that trail was off limits due to unstable terrain. But one night around 2:17 a.m., a call came through. A hiker had gone missing near the Ridgeway Overlook. Search teams were spread out. Harper said he saw something moving toward the direction of the closed trail. I grabbed my pack, clipped Tanner's compass to my belt, and stepped into the woods with nothing but moonlight stretching thin across the branches. The forest felt strange that night, too warm for autumn, too quiet for comfort. At first I walked quickly. Then I slowed. Every sound behind me felt like a second pair of footsteps echoing mine. Not loud, not close, but enough to tell me someone or something was following. I reached Trail 47 at 3:20 a.m. The entrance looked like any other forgotten path, overgrown with ferns, half buried under roots, almost invisible. The air smelled old, like wet stone and dead leaves that never decomposed. The moment I stepped onto it, Tanner's compass needle spun so fast the glass fogged. A mile in, I found the old ranger shack. It was more like a rotting shed, leaning to one side as if something had pushed it. The windows had long been smashed out. The door hung crooked, And there on the ground, half buried under moss, was a compass identical to the one I carried. It was the one Tanner said he lost years ago, the one he claimed the forest took. I picked it up. The metal was ice cold even though the night was warm. The lid snapped shut on its own. When I opened it again, the needle pointed straight into the dark woods ahead. I followed. The farther I walked, the heavier my body felt. I thought I heard breathing behind me, slow and steady, like someone towering at my back. I refused to turn around. Some part of me whispered, "Don't look, don't look, don't look." I clenched my jaw and kept moving. Half an hour later, I found the hiker. Sort of. He was standing in the middle of the trail, barefoot, his clothes torn, his arms dangling like he had forgotten how they worked. His head twitched as if listening for something deeper in the forest. I called out to him. He didn't answer. When I got closer, I saw his eyes were wide open, but he wasn't seeing me. He was looking past me into the trees behind my shoulder. I grabbed his wrist gently. His skin was freezing. He finally blinked, whispering, "It's still walking." I asked what was walking. He didn't respond. Instead, he pointed toward a place where the trees grew too tight together, almost woven like a wall. Then, everything went wrong at once. The footsteps I'd been hearing all night finally caught up. They didn't sound like a person anymore. They sounded heavy, dragging, like something pulling its weight forward. The hiker screamed without sound, his mouth open but his throat refusing to let the noise out. I dragged him back the way I came as the trees began to tremble. I didn't look. I didn't want to see what was behind us. Branches snapped. Something large moved between the pines with a long, scraping sound. The hiker kept pointing backward, his hands shaking so hard his fingers blurred in the moonlight. I forced him to keep moving, my own steps stumbling as fear clawed its way up my throat. The silence broke. Not with a roar, not with a scream, but with a deep, breathy sound like something inhaling the scent of fear on our skin. The hiker collapsed. I lifted him over my shoulder, even though my legs burned. Every step felt like a decision between life and death. The compass in my pocket grew hot. Somewhere behind us, the second echo of footsteps grew louder. We reached the ranger shack just as something hit the tree line behind us with a thud so deep it shook dirt loose from the roof. I shoved the hiker inside. The shack door barely closed. Through the cracks I saw movement, tall, wrong, bending in ways a body shouldn't. It paused, sniffing the air. My heart beat so fast I thought I would faint. Then, slowly, it backed away, not because it lost interest, but because it knew something I didn't. That was the night I understood what Tanner meant. Trail 47 was not a place. It was a door. Something lived behind it, something ancient, something that followed you home if you looked too long. But my nightmare didn't end there. It continued with Mercer. He took over operations 2 days later. He dismissed the attack as hallucination caused by night stress. He ordered us never to file reports without his review. He told the hiker's family he had simply fallen and panicked, nothing more. But when the hiker woke up in the hospital 3 days later, he whispered that the thing in the woods had followed him in his dreams. He refused to close his eyes after that. The doctors sedated him. He woke screaming anyway. The next month, 2 more rangers went missing. Both found near Trail 47, both unconscious, both with marks on their arms like long fingers had wrapped around them. Mercer said it was dehydration. I said nothing. My warning letters to the Forest Service's office were never answered. Either the reports never left the station, or someone high above made sure they disappeared. 3 months later, old Tanner vanished. The only clue was a bloody compass outside the shack on 47, the same compass I had found weeks earlier. Instead of pointing north, the needle pointed toward the woods again. Then came the night when everything fell apart. Trail signs across the forest kept flipping directions. Sometimes turned backward, sometimes pointing hikers into dangerous ravines, sometimes pointing toward 47. I fixed one near the South Ridge one afternoon. The next morning it was reversed again, but this time the screws had been torn out and the wood had deep nail marks, as if something had clawed it. My supervisor said it was a bear. I knew bears didn't unscrew hardware, More silence patches grew across the forest. More places where footsteps echoed twice. More moments when I felt a second breath mixing with mine. I knew something was coming. 2 nights later, it did. I was patrolling near the north edge when the radio crackled with static. Then a voice I recognized whispered, "Don't let it touch you." I froze. The voice was Tanner's. The man who was missing for 3 weeks. I tried calling back but heard only breathing. Slow, deep, deep. Behind me, I turned. The trees shifted, the shadows deepened, and something tall stepped out from between the pines. I thought my heart would stop as its shape bent under the branches. It had no clear form, just long arms, long legs, and a head that tilted too far sideways. Its body flickered like a shadow cast by a fire that wasn't there. It didn't breathe like a human. It breathed like wind forced through a cave. I walked backward slowly. The creature mirrored me, taking steps that cracked branches twice each time. One crack for something else inside it. When I reached the trail's edge, I ran. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran until the footsteps behind me shifted from echoes to real pounding. I didn't stop until I reached the station. Even then, I didn't feel safe. That night, Mercer appeared in my doorway with a clipboard, telling me I had until morning to sign new reports that stated nothing abnormal was happening, that the trail signs were vandalized by kids, that the rangers in the hospital had fainted because of heat, that old Tanner had wandered off on his own due to age. I refused to sign. Mercer leaned close, his smile thin, his eyes cold. He said my career would be over if I kept pushing. I told him I didn't care anymore. I cared about the truth. He told me truth had never kept anyone alive. The next morning, I was placed on forced leave. My access keys were taken. My reports vanished. But the worst part came that evening when I walked past the station one last time and saw the sign near the entrance flipped backward again, pointing toward the forest. The scratches on the wood were deeper. Something had followed me. That night, I dreamed of the hiker I had rescued. He stood at the foot of my bed, his eyes wide, pointing toward the woods behind my house. When I woke, my window was open even though I had locked it. 2 days later, the hospital called to say the hiker was missing. His room was empty, the window open. The police said he must have wandered off. I knew better. 3 nights ago, I got the call about the 2 rangers in the hospital. The same pattern, the same marks, the same silence around Trail 47. That's when everything snapped inside me. That's when I punched the wall. That's when I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Maybe this story will reach someone. Maybe someone with authority will read what I saw and understand that Trail 47 should never be opened, never walked, never followed, because something walks there, something that learns your footsteps until they sound like its own, and if you turn around at the wrong moment, it follows you home. I still have Tanner's compass on my desk. The needle spins every night at exactly 2:43 a.m. I watch it turn like something inside the earth is calling it back. I don't know how long I can stay away from the forest. I don't know how long before the footsteps outside my house get closer. But I do know one thing. The trail never lets go of who walks it. It remembers you. And someday, it wants you back. I felt the first sting of fear long before I understood why. Maybe it was the cold wind slipping under my collar or the way the trees pressed closer to the ranger road that night, leaning in like they wanted to listen. I remember thinking that I should have quit this job years ago, back when my knees didn't ache and the long shifts didn't turn my brain to mush. But I was still there, a park ranger in a place that looked peaceful on maps, a place people hiked to heal or think or just breathe, even though it hid things no one could explain. My name is Wesley Hart, and I had been working the northern side of Bracken Pines for almost 12 years when everything went wrong. Back then, people called me the Quiet Ranger, the one who stayed late and took extra patrols, partly because I didn't like going home to an empty cabin, and partly because the forest at night felt easier to understand than people. I grew up in small towns my whole life, bouncing between relatives after my parents were taken in a highway crash, so stillness always felt safer to me than voices. By the time I started working the park, I thought I'd seen all kinds of strange things, missing campers, animals that acted wrong, odd footprints too big or too deep, but none of that prepared me for what happened that March. That night I had just finished repairing a broken generator behind the station, hands stiff from the cold, boots soaked from melting snow, and my back was screaming from being twisted under the metal frame. I was exhausted in a way I only felt after long winter shifts, the kind of exhaustion that crawls under your skin and makes your thoughts slow. I checked the logbook, signed out, and headed toward my truck, ready to collapse into bed without even taking my boots off. It was around 2:17 a.m., a time I never liked crossing paths with because the forest felt older at those hours and everything inside it seemed to breathe a little too slowly. The drive out of the station led down a narrow one-lane road that curved through dead pines and open meadows. Most nights I'd have my radio on, but the battery had died earlier when I forgot to turn the volume down during a search call, and I'd left the spare battery inside a drawer at home. The silence made the road feel longer, like the forest kept stretching the distance just to see if I'd notice. My eyes felt heavy, and twice I drifted just enough to cross the center gravel ridge. When I saw the small pullout near the ridge top, a flat patch carved by snowplows in the winter months, I eased the truck in and let the engine idle down. I figured a 10-minute break would be enough to reset my head. I leaned back, rolled the window down a few inches, and let the cold night air fill the cab. The forest around me was dark, too dark, the kind of dark that restless animals avoided. I took a sip from the warm metal-tasted water bottle I'd left under the seat. There were no lights, no cabins, no trailheads anywhere near that spot, nothing but trees and hills and the distant call of an owl that sounded unsure whether it wanted to speak at all. I set a timer on my watch and closed my eyes. I must have been sitting there for maybe 7 minutes when I heard something that didn't belong on a quiet ridge, the crunch of tires rolling slowly over gravel. I sat up fast and looked in the mirror. A dark SUV eased into the pullout behind me, stopping about 30 feet back at an angle, its lights off, engine barely making a sound. No one got out, no one opened a door, no movement at all. It just sat there in the dark, a black shape blending into the trees. My pulse quickened, and I felt the old instinct settle into my arms and chest, the one that told me when a situation wasn't simple. People sometimes pulled off the road to sleep, but they never parked that far back, and they never shut every light off. I tried to peer through the glass of the SUV, but the windows were too dark. A part of me wanted to turn the key and drive away, but another part froze, too tired to think clearly. 2 minutes passed, then 3, then 5. The SUV didn't move. The silence felt heavier now, pushing at my ears like the air before a storm. My hand drifted toward the truck's ignition without even thinking about it. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they just needed rest. Maybe they were lost. Maybe their lights were broken. Then the driver's door opened. A tall figure stepped out, backlit only by the faint glow of an interior dome light that clicked off after a second. I couldn't see his face, just his outline, steady and controlled, walking toward my truck without looking around. He wore a dark coat and jeans, civilian clothes, no badge, no gear. I straightened up and locked the door with a soft click, trying not to draw attention. The man kept coming until he stopped just a few feet from my window. He lifted his hand and knocked 3 times, sharp enough to break the quiet. I cracked the window just a sliver, enough to hear him if he spoke. He leaned down close, and in the dashboard glow I saw his face finally, clean-shaven, eyes cold and unreadable, jaw set like someone holding back irritation. He told me he was law enforcement and needed to see my identification. He didn't show a badge, he didn't mention a reason. He didn't ask a question, just a demand. Something inside me hardened. Real officers in this region always announced their agency, and they always showed ID first. And none of them patrolled remote ridge pullouts at 2-something a.m. in civilian clothes. I asked to see his credentials. He stared at me for a moment too long, then straightened up and said to wait. He walked back toward the SUV, but not like someone going to fetch a badge, more like someone annoyed a plan didn't work. Halfway there, he stopped and pulled something from his pocket, probably a phone, and looked down at it. I had the growing sense that he wasn't calling backup. He was calling someone else entirely. That's when the second vehicle appeared. A truck rolled up the ridge with its headlights off, only running lights visible, moving slow, too slow. It turned into the pullout and stopped behind the SUV, completely blocking my only way out. My chest tightened and a cold rush tore down my spine. This wasn't random. This was a setup. I didn't wait. My hand twisted the key before I even knew I'd decided. The engine roared awake. The man turned sharply, shouting something I couldn't hear. I slammed the truck into gear, jerked the wheel to the right, and drove straight into the thick brush off the pullout. Branches scraped the sides. The undercarriage groaned. The truck bounced so hard my teeth clicked together, but I kept going, pushing through sage and rocks and uneven ground. Behind me, both vehicles lit their high beams, and at least one tried to follow, but their heavy frames struggled in the rough terrain. I didn't slow. I held the wheel like my hands were glued there, breath loud in my chest. Finally, the hill dipped downward and I saw the narrow park road ahead, maybe 40 yards away. I aimed for the opening, burst through a row of dead shrubs, and hit pavement with a loud crack. My tires screeched, and for a moment I thought they would give out, but they held. I floored it, reaching 60, then 70, then more, until the curve forced me to drop speed or risk flipping the truck into a ditch. I checked the mirror again and again. No one followed. But that wasn't the end. When I reached the ranger station, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely write the incident down. I tried calling the county office, but my radio was dead, and the landline was out from a storm earlier in the evening. I didn't want to leave the station, not until daylight, not until I felt sure those vehicles hadn't trailed me at a distance. I sat in the corner cot, boots still on, and waited. The next morning, I contacted local law enforcement and reported everything. 2 deputies came to interview me, taking careful notes. They said there had been strange activity around the north trails, hikers reporting being followed, campers hearing engines late at night, gear disappearing. None of it leaned toward anything like what I saw, but it fit enough to concern them. Still, nothing could explain what came later. 3 days after my report, a detective contacted me and said they'd found a burned vehicle on the ridge, the same pullout where I'd stopped. It was nothing but a skeleton of metal, melted and blackened. Inside the trunk, they found gear that had survived the flames just enough to identify. Tactical vests, pieces of uniforms, military-style equipment that didn't belong to civilians. They thought it was connected to whatever group I'd run from. But that wasn't the only strange thing found that week. On a search patrol 2 miles north, rangers found a missing hiker's tent in perfect condition, standing upright with stakes still in the ground. The sleeping bag inside was torn from the inside out, as if someone or something had fought desperately to escape. No tracks were around the tent, no sign of the hiker, nothing disturbed except the zipper shredded in a way I had never seen before. 2 nights later, on my shift, I smelled smoke. It was faint at first, drifting through the trees like someone burning pine needles far away. I called the station, but they hadn't detected any fire alerts. Another ranger, Melissa, said she smelled it too. We walked toward the ridge, checking the hills, scanning the sky. Nothing. No flicker, no ash, no heat. But when we returned to the station, both our uniforms smelled strongly of smoke, like we had stood in the middle of a burning building. None of it made sense. And then came the whistle. A shrill blast echoed through the woods one windless night, the kind of emergency whistle hikers carry for danger. It came again and again, each call sharp and desperate. I ran toward the sound with my flashlight, crashing through brush, calling out for whoever needed help. The whistle grew louder as I got closer until it echoed right in front of me. I found it inside a hollow tree, a silver whistle resting alone on the dirt, still ringing, vibrating like someone had blown into it a second before. But there was no one there, and the woods around me were silent. Every hair on my arms lifted. By then I stopped pretending the forest was just forest. Something else lived there, something watching, something that wanted me to return to that ridge. The more I tried to ignore it, the more the forest pressed in, whispering with branches, echoing with distant whistles that never had bodies behind them. I saw shadows moving where no person could walk. heard footsteps pacing the Ranger Road long after midnight. Sometimes I woke to the sound of 3 sharp knocks on glass, like someone tapping my cabin window and waiting for me to look. I avoided the ridge for weeks, but work eventually forced me back. The day I returned, the pullout was empty. No burned metal, no tracks, nothing disturbed, but the feeling in the air was wrong, heavy, electric. I stepped out of my truck and the world felt smaller somehow, as if trees leaned closer. And then I saw it. A new set of tire marks leading into the brush, and beside them, half buried in mud, was an emergency whistle identical to the one found in the hollow tree. As I picked it up, the forest around me grew still, too still. The air tasted like metal. Something washed me from between the trees. I could feel its stare crawling across my neck. The whistle warmed in my hand. That was when I knew the truth. I had never escaped that night. Not really. The forest wasn't done with me. And whatever waited beyond the tree line wasn't finished. I left the ridge and never returned, but some nights I still smell smoke drifting through my cabin. Some nights I hear the whistle blowing from the woods behind my home, and some nights I wake to the soft sound of knuckles tapping on glass, always 3 knocks, always patient. Sometimes I wonder if the hiker who tore out of his sleeping bag heard the same sounds I did. Sometimes I wonder if those men in the dark SUVs were running from something too. And sometimes, when the wind is still and the air is cold, I feel the forest calling me back, whispering my name in a voice that almost sounds human. I never planned on sharing what happened during my time at Pine Verge National Forest, because even now when I think about it, something tight curls inside my chest, like a hand pressing on my heart. Back then, I thought the woods were peaceful, that they were a place where nothing bad could happen if you respected the land. I was wrong in ways I still don't fully understand. My name is Drew. Before I ever became a ranger, I worked small jobs in a small fishing town near the coast. I stocked shelves, carried furniture, and delivered mail. None of it fit me. My mind always felt too loud. The forest was the only place that made me feel quiet. So when I turned 30, I applied for a ranger position thinking the woods could fix me. At first, they did. Pine Verge National Forest was huge, with valleys and lakes that swallowed echoes. I lived in a 1-bedroom ranger cabin near Echo Timber Campground. My dog Shade, a big black mutt who had been abandoned by hikers years earlier, followed me everywhere. He was calm, smart, loyal, and somehow always knew when something felt wrong. I had been working there 8 months when the first strange thing happened. I came back from night patrol around 3 in the morning, exhausted enough that my eyes burned. As I walked up to my cabin, I noticed the front door wasn't sitting perfectly in its frame. It wasn't open, just slightly off, like someone pulled it almost shut but didn't let the latch catch. I stared at it for a long 10 seconds. I was sure I had locked it before leaving. Shade sniffed around like he smelled something strange. I pushed the door open slowly, expecting a raccoon or a mess inside, but nothing was touched. Everything looked exactly like I left it. My boots, my blanket, the dishes, the air even smelled the same. I checked the rooms anyway because fear makes people foolish, but nothing was missing. I wrote it off as a mistake caused by lack of sleep. Then it happened again a week later. Another night patrol, another return home around the same time, another almost closed door. But this time I knew for certain I had locked it. I even double-checked the handle before leaving. Shade growled softly as we entered, but again, nothing was moved. At least nothing major, but tiny differences began appearing. My towel hanging at the wrong angle. My kitchen chair pulled slightly out. My closet cracked open even though the squeak annoyed me so badly I always shut it tight. These were small things, but I knew my routines, and something in my cabin was shifting. I began taking photos before leaving each patrol, just to compare later. My coworker Laney said, maybe wood warped in cold weather. But Shade's behavior told me something else was wrong. He refused to sleep near the front door anymore. Finally, I went to our supervisor, Mr. Walsh, a tired man who typed slower than snails moved. I told him the cabin felt off, like someone was entering while I was gone. He said ranger cabins used digital key cards and all entries were logged. He offered to request my logs from the main office. I said yes instantly. Those next 3 days were torture. I kept sleeping lightly, waking at the sound of falling pine cones. I locked my bedroom door, even though it felt ridiculous. I bought a tiny door alarm which Shade hated. Every night I felt watched, even inside my own walls. When the logs finally arrived, Walsh handed me the folder without looking me in the eyes. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. My key entries were there, but so were entries from a second key card. Someone entered my cabin 7 times that month, always between 2 and 4 in the morning, always when I was out on patrol. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the papers. Walsh called law enforcement immediately. 2 forest officers came, one young and nervous, the other older, named Officer Hargrove, with steady eyes. They photographed everything and said they'd pull camera footage and trace the second card. Those 3 waiting days felt endless. I slept in the ranger station for safety. Shade never left my side. When Hargrove finally called, the truth felt unreal. The second key card belonged to a former ranger named Colton Price who lived in my cabin years before. During his final week of work, he claimed his card was lost, so they deactivated it and issued him a new one. Except the system never fully deactivated the old card. It still worked. Colton had been entering my cabin, and not just mine. The footage they showed me made my skin crawl. Colton approached the cabin wearing a hood and keeping his head low, moving with the confidence of someone who knew the layout. He swiped the card, glanced around once, then disappeared inside. He stayed over an hour. When he came out, he held nothing. He wasn't stealing valuables. He was studying people, collecting bits of lives, pretending to belong. When police searched his new residence, they found belongings from several women in nearby regions. Photos, socks, journals, hair ties. They found one of my old ranger patches tucked neatly into a drawer. Colton was arrested on multiple charges. The ranger cabins had their locks reissued. Everyone thought the nightmare was over. But then something else began. Something no one blamed on Colton. 2 weeks after his arrest, I found footprints in fresh snow near my cabin. Deep, clear footprints that started suddenly with no trail leading to them and ended suddenly with no trail leading away. As if someone had appeared in the middle of the woods, walked a few steps, and vanished. Shade refused to go near them. That same afternoon, at an old picnic area, I saw deep scratches on a wooden bench. I had cleaned that area yesterday. The next day, more scratches appeared, bigger, claw-like, as if something visited that spot every night. A week later, around 2:43 a.m., Shade froze while we walked down a trail. His eyes locked onto a thick bush. He growled low, trembling. I pointed my flashlight toward it, expecting a raccoon. Instead, inside the leaves was an old ranger badge, not from any current ranger. It belonged to a ranger who disappeared 10 years ago. His body was never found. I took the badge back to the station. The older rangers exchanged looks that scared me more than anything. They whispered that Pine Verge kept pieces of people lost inside it and sometimes returned them. That night, tapping began on my windows. Soft, slow, like fingertips gliding over the glass. Shade barked until it stopped, but every time I went outside, no footprints marked the snow. Then the tapping moved to the door. One night I woke to the handle turning gently, just once, like someone testing it. The lock stayed shut. Shade went wild barking, but when I looked out the small window, all I saw was still darkness. The next morning, footprints appeared again behind my cabin with that same impossible pattern, starting nowhere, ending nowhere. The dread became part of me. Every patrol felt like walking through a mouth with teeth hidden in the shadows. Shade began refusing certain trails, pulling hard away from them. Birds went silent when I approached. I found broken branches shaped like symbols. Then came the night I will never forget. I was patrolling near the picnic area around 3:19 a.m. The cold made my breath hang in the air. Shade stiffened and stared at the tree line. I swung my flashlight and saw something tall between the trunks, much too tall. Its shoulders were narrow, its neck tilted wrong, like bones weren't attached properly. Its eyes reflected the light like an animal, but they were twice as high as Shade's head. It did not move when I saw it. It just watched me. Then it stepped forward, slow, smooth, unnatural motions that made my legs feel weak. When it moved near the bush where I found the missing ranger's badge, its shape flickered, and then it vanished. Not walked away, not hid, vanished, like a breath disappearing in cold air. I ran until the world blurred. Rangers searched at dawn. They found footprints again, that same impossible pattern. They found a torn piece of a ranger uniform, belonging to the same ranger who disappeared 10 years ago. After that, nobody pretended it was just stress anymore. Older rangers whispered that Pine Verge had shadows older than any map. Some called them guardians, some called them echoes. Some said not every ranger who vanished was taken by nature. Some were claimed by something else. I never transferred out. Maybe I should have. But I stayed. Shade stayed too. Even now, some nights, when everything is quiet, I hear soft tapping on my window again. Just enough to make me wonder. Just enough to remind me that the forest remembers me, and whatever stood between those trees remembers me too. I always thought working alone in the deep woodland towers would keep my mind quiet, but I was wrong. Something waits out there, something that remembers voices even after the bodies are gone. I never planned to be a park ranger. My name is Callum Ward, and before all of this, I worked small jobs in smaller towns, drifting from place to place without leaving any mark. When I finally took a seasonal ranger job in Sable Ridge National Reserve, it felt like a clean start. No noise, no crowds, just trees that breathed slow and steady like sleeping giants. My supervisor liked my steady hands and said I could help with survey logs, radio checks, patrol footage, and the occasional lost hiker. It sounded simple enough, and for the first year, it actually was. Quiet mornings, long trails, and evenings where the only sound was wind brushing through the pines. I lived in a cabin past the old creek bed, a small wooden place built decades before I was born. Everything inside creaked like it was tired of holding itself together. I didn't mind. I liked its honesty. Sometimes volunteers came to help with wildlife tagging or trail cleanup, and sometimes we assisted researchers collecting field interviews. That was the part I liked the most. I guess it reminded me of stories my grandfather used to tell, the ones he carried from a war he never named. I never learned if they were true, but I knew they were heavy. A few months into my second season, the main office handed me a data drive from an older ranger named Marlon Graves, someone who had retired years before I arrived. They wanted me to digitize his old audio logs and sort them into the archive. I expected weather reports or trail notes. Instead, I found something else. The first log started with his calm voice describing the morning fog. But 20 minutes in, his tone changed, slow and uneasy, like someone pressing against a memory they didn't want to open. He talked about a rescue mission for missing campers in the northern range, an area so remote that few visitors ever reached it. He said they were told the campers were in danger, but when the team arrived at the valley, something felt wrong. The ground shimmered like wet stone, and the air felt heavy. I paused the recording, unsettled for reasons I couldn't name, and told myself I was just tired. But deep down, something in his voice stayed with me. I put it aside and returned to my normal duties, pretending the log meant nothing until the real event started. I was on late watch in the North Tower, a thin metal structure perched over a large clearing. It was almost 2:17 a.m., and frost crept along the glass. The radio stayed quiet except for tiny bursts of static. I rubbed my arms and leaned forward, looking down at the clearing. That's when the first call came through. Control said a visitor had limped into the station with an arm injury, claiming someone helped him down the mountain. The strange part was this: he said the man knew his name before he even spoke. Control wanted to confirm which ranger had gone out there, because none of us had been dispatched. They asked if I had left my tower. I said no. No one had been near that ridge in days. The line crackled. Control repeated the injured hiker's exact words. He kept saying the same thing over and over. The ranger said he remembers you. The man who helped him even described his clothes, voice, and badge number. But the badge belonged to Marlon Graves, the retired ranger whose logs I had been listening to. I stared at the radio, trying to swallow the cold crawling up my spine. Hours later, still on watch, I heard something far below the tower, a faint crunching in the snow. Then the radio from Central buzzed again, saying a visitor just reported a man standing under my tower, staring straight up. I leaned over the rail, breath held. No one was there, only fresh footprints, deep and spaced like someone had been standing still for a long time. I thought maybe the snow shifted or maybe the visitor imagined it, but the prints were real. Too real. I tried to calm myself. I told myself fear makes shapes where there are none. Still, something in my chest tightened. The next day, while checking a trail about 6 miles out, my boot hit something half buried under leaves, a recorder. A small black device with faded paint, the same model we used years back. I turned it over. My name was scratched on the side. I hadn't lost anything. I hadn't recorded anything out there. My throat went dry as I pressed play. A voice came through, my voice. The recording was of me, describing the trees, the trail, and then the sound of someone calling my name. The recording ended with a whisper so close it felt like someone leaning by my ear. The whisper said, "I hear you." My hand shook as I shut it off. I wanted to throw it as far as I could, but some instinct told me to pocket it instead. I hurried back to the station, wanting answers, but no one had any. They tried to explain it away with tech glitches or old devices being reused, but nothing matched the truth I felt deep inside. Someone or something was calling me. Days went on like normal, or at least I pretended they did, but the forest didn't feel the same. The air felt charged, and the shadows didn't fall the way they used to. And every night, without fail, the radio would hiss with faint voices. Broken, static-filled, calling names I didn't recognize. Until one night, I did. The names belonged to rangers who had disappeared years ago. I kept trying to convince myself it was old transmissions bouncing in the valley, but the voices were too clear, too fresh. Sometimes they even sounded confused, as if they didn't know where they were, as if they believed they were still on duty, like they were answering roll call in the wrong world. Everything came apart on the night I received the second data drive. It was labeled Graves Field Log, last entry. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. It started normally, with his soft, steady voice, but minutes in, he whispered something like he didn't want anyone else to hear it. He talked about the mission again, about the families they were told to guard in that shattered valley. He said none of them spoke, not a single word. He said they didn't cry, didn't ask for help, didn't move much at all. One woman kept looking over their shoulders, waiting for someone else to come. As dawn hit, the valley changed. The light bent wrong. The ground looked dark and wet like glass. Half their team vanished without a sound. When they called roll at night, the missing men answered. Their voices came from the ground, or the trees, or behind them. He said he started to hear those voices even after the mission, late at night, calling his name. Then he said something that made me pause the file. He said they still think it's nighttime. My heart dropped. The recording filled with a soft breath by the mic. Not his, not mine. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what happened to him. I searched through the archives, old reports, patrol logs, anything mentioning Graves. What I found twisted my stomach. His final appearance at the ranger station happened after his retirement. He visited, gave his last tape, then stepped outside for air. The camera caught the door opening, but it never captured him leaving. He vanished between frames. Just like the hiker said, a man helped him who knew his name. Just like the man beneath my tower leaving footprints without a body. Just like the recorder with my voice that I never made. Whatever happened to Graves hadn't ended. It had followed someone. Maybe it followed names. Maybe it followed voices. Maybe it followed the people who listened. Nights became worse after that. Every watch shift felt like sitting above a huge sleeping creature. The trees whispered, the snow cracked, the radios breathed. Sometimes when the wind pushed against the glass, the shadows below the tower looked like people lined up in rows. One evening, while checking the ridge before dusk, I found a hiker limping down the slope. His arm was bleeding. He said someone had helped him walk, someone who knew his name before he said it, someone wearing an old ranger jacket with a faded badge. He said the badge said Graves. That night, I sat in my office reviewing the footage from the north entrance camera. The gate stayed closed, no signal of anyone entering or leaving. But at exactly 3 minutes into the recording, the frame flickered. For less than a second, the shape of a man stood by the fence, face blurred, posture too straight, like old habits holding him upright. Then gone. My chest tightened until I could hardly breathe. Something had followed him out of that valley, something that didn't let go. Something that clung to the voices of the missing, repeating them until they fit into a new throat. I should have left the job. I should have run. But fear traps you the same way shadows do, making you freeze when you should move. On my last night in the tower, the radios went silent, not static, not broken, silent. The forest held its breath. Then, softly, from the far corner of the tower, I heard footsteps. Not outside, inside, slow, heavy, measured. A shape pressed into the shadows near the hatch. I forced myself to look. A man stood there, half of him swallowed in darkness, wearing the old ranger jacket with the faded badge. His face was blurred, the features shifting like fog trying to hold a form. He lifted his head as if hearing something distant. Behind him, more shapes gathered on the stairs. Dozens. Their voices rose together, clipped and quiet, calling names from a list only they remembered. One of them whispered mine. When I stepped back, the tower creaked, the air stretched thin, and the world dimmed as if a veil slipped over it. I realized something then, something too heavy to hold. They weren't calling for me. They thought I was already one of them. The last thing I remember is the doorway filling with their shadows, the forest bending into night, though it was barely dawn, and the cold voice saying the same thing I heard on the recorder. I hear you. After that, nothing. When the morning crew arrived, the tower was empty. My jacket hung on the chair. My notebook sat on the railing. My radio lay on the floor with the record light blinking even though I hadn't turned it on. The entrance camera never showed me leaving. Some nights, long after, rangers on late watch report hearing a voice whispering names through the tower speaker, a voice that sounds like someone they almost remember. Sometimes they say they see a figure standing in the clearing, staring up, waiting for orders. They always find fresh footprints in the snow. I work as a park ranger now, but back then I was new to the job, running long patrols and safety checks through the backcountry trails of Greywater National Preserve. I'd taken the position after leaving a highway maintenance crew, hoping quieter work might settle my nerves after a rough past. My name is Mark Lawrence, and during that summer, my assignment was simple on paper but unnerving in practice. I was supposed to check remote ranger stations, emergency beacons, and aging communication towers spread across miles of isolated wilderness. Most nights, I camped out in the truck or in emergency bunk cabins scattered through the forest. That week, the heat had been brutal. I'd already hiked 15 miles on foot, repairing a transmitter on the far ridge, and by late evening, I was dehydrated and exhausted. So when I saw the old ranger cabin listed on my map, tucked near the marshland on a barely used service road, I decided to stop for the night. The place was called Pine Lantern Outpost, even though not a single pine tree grew anywhere nearby, only scraggly birch and low brush swaying in uneven gusts. The building looked tired, its roof sagging slightly and porch slanting, as if it wanted to slide into the mud. The fog rolling in from the bog hung thick around the wooden steps, swallowing the trees in a white haze that shifted like someone breathing. Inside the cabin office sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from rough bark, weathered skin and stiff posture, silver buzz cut and eyes that never stopped scanning the windows as if expecting something to step out of the mist. He introduced himself as Campbell, said he used to be a field sergeant for the Reserve Corps before taking over the forgotten outpost. He tapped the desk lightly and said he offered discounts to anyone who'd ever worn a patch or served in uniform, then grinned in a way that felt a bit too practiced. His story spilled fast, about old operations, endless deployments abroad, and how the new generation of recruits didn't understand toughness anymore. I'd met plenty of older vets who talked like that. He fit the mold well enough. I signed the logbook, grabbed an old brass key, and headed to the cabin room closest to the tree line. It smelled faintly of wet wood and stale cleaner, but it was tidy, with floral curtains that rattled against the window as the fog thickened outside. The old TV on the dresser blinked a static bar across the screen, and the remote had a crack running through it like it had been stepped on more than once. I showered, grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler in my truck, and sat on the porch while the sky bled into dark gray. Campbell came by again, clipboard in hand, talking about how he liked keeping an eye on things because the preserve traffic was unpredictable, especially with hikers, hunters, and research groups passing through. He asked about my job, which equipment I serviced, and if I'd ever been assigned to this region before. His tone sounded casual, but his gaze kept drifting toward my truck like he was memorizing every detail. I shrugged it off at the time. People in lonely places talk too much. It was their way of staying sane. Later that night, around 2:17 a.m., I noticed something wrong. From the bed, I could see a faint red blink coming from the vent above the door. I assumed it was a smoke detector at first, but when I stood on the chair and looked closer, I found a tiny black lens tucked inside the plastic grill. My stomach tightened. Ranger cabins didn't come with cameras. I told myself maybe it was some outdated security sensor, something installed years ago and forgotten. But the thought hung in my head like a weight, pressing deeper each minute. I barely slept after that. When morning finally arrived, Campbell was already outside sweeping the porch, acting like nothing unusual existed in the world. He smiled like we were old co-workers, offered me coffee from a dented thermos, and asked if I'd slept well. I lied and said yes. He mentioned he mostly ran the outpost for seasonal rangers, saying he kept the rates low because he believed those who protected the wilderness deserved something extra. Generous words, but there was something rehearsed behind them, like he practiced the lines. While packing my bag, I noticed faint scratch marks along the bottom of the bathroom mirror frame, as if someone had tried to pry it loose. A soft hum came from behind the wall, low, steady, mechanical. It grew louder only when I leaned in. Before I could examine it further, the door creaked open. Campbell stood there with a towel folded over his arm. He said he was checking if I needed extras for the road. I thanked him, closed the door, and locked it fast. But after he left, the hum behind the mirror sounded even louder. I checked out soon after, driving toward the highway diner outside the preserve boundary. I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had dodged something, pulled away from something I wasn't meant to see. When the waitress asked where I'd stayed, I mentioned Pine Lantern Outpost. Her expression froze solid. She asked me to repeat it, and when I did, she said the place had been shut down 8 months ago for structural hazards and electrical violations. She said the ranger assigned to run the outpost had moved out after a fire damaged the basement. But I had slept there hours earlier. When I insisted it was open and the man running it was very real, she shook her head slowly and whispered that nobody was supposed to be living out there. I called the county ranger office that afternoon to ask what was going on, thinking maybe Campbell was illegally squatting or running the place without proper clearance. The dispatcher asked for my name, then told me to stay exactly where I was. Within 15 minutes, 2 officers walked into the diner, took my full statement, and asked me to describe the man in detail. When I said his name was Campbell, their faces tightened. They didn't tell me anything at first. They only asked for my cabin key, which I handed over, and then left quickly. 2 days later, an investigator called me. He said they went to the cabin before sunrise, found the entire place abandoned, doors unlocked, the office torn apart, lights still burning. The basement hatch had been smashed open, revealing something far worse. Inside, they found traces of blood near the drain and a snarl of wires running from the ceiling down into a pile of disconnected monitors and power units. Every guest room had hidden lenses disguised as vents, mirror screws, coat hooks, even the wooden trim, all of them wired to one central hub. The man I'd met, Campbell, was long gone. The investigator explained that several hikers and visiting field researchers had vanished along the same forest road in the last year. All of them had signed the outpost logbook, but when checked against preserve records, none of them ever made it out of the region. Campbell wasn't his real name. He had stolen it. The wheel ranger who once worked that post had vanished after reporting strange activity along the fog line. Nobody ever found him. The man I'd spoken to seemed to be impersonating officials, luring travelers, then trapping them inside the cabin disguised as an outpost. The blood evidence in the basement wasn't enough to prove anything, and no bodies were found, only shreds of clothing, bits of ruined recording tape, and fragments of boot soles buried behind the old foundation. The investigators believed he fled the moment he saw unfamiliar vehicle tracks near the service road. They told me my report was the last confirmed encounter anyone had with him. For years after that, things in Greywater Preserve got stranger. Fog would roll in unusually thick, and when rangers walked through it at night, they claimed their shadows moved a second late, like reflections lagging behind. It happened to me once while hiking a trail near the marsh. My own outline dragged its feet, trailing my steps with a slow, sick delay. At another spot, an abandoned cabin used by wildlife researchers always had a single chair that changed position each night, even though the door remained padlocked from the outside. We checked the logs repeatedly. Nobody had keys except administration. And at the lake, a backpack belonging to a drowned hiker kept appearing near the shore. It came from a case closed years ago. The hiker's body was never found. Every time the pack appeared damp and muddy, rangers logged it, sent it for evidence, and yet it returned again. No drag marks. Sometimes I wonder if Campbell wandered deeper into the woods, maybe hiding in the swamp caverns or old mine tunnels below the ridge. Maybe he never left at all. Maybe he just watches from the fog, waiting for another lost ranger to wander too far. Some nights when I'm on patrol and the wind scrapes along the trees, I swear I can feel someone behind me, just beyond the haze. And every time I stay at an outpost, I check the vents and mirrors 3 times, running my fingers along the edges for hidden screws or tiny blinking lights. Because even now, when I wake up alone at 2:43 a.m., I sometimes see a faint red glow reflected in the window glass. And I don't know if it's a warning, or a memory, or someone watching from the dark. I was 30 years old when I finally broke and returned to the wilderness that had taken my older brother. People said Vincent probably froze or fell. Maybe a wild animal got him. Maybe he just wandered too far, but I knew him better. He was sharp, patient, and always wrote down every turn he took. The fact that his body was never found kept eating at me until the ache felt like a second heartbeat. I told friends I needed fresh air and space, but the truth was simpler and heavier. I wanted answers, even if they came with teeth. My name is Rowan Hale, and I work as a park ranger now. Most people think rangers spend their days rescuing hikers or chasing bears, but the truth is quieter and stranger. You walk long miles with your own breathing for company. You learn to recognize patterns in the woods. You feel the land shift under you like it's listening. I never wanted this job, but after Vincent disappeared, the Forest Service posted an opening in a remote district called Amber Hollow Reserve. My interview lasted 12 minutes. They hired me fast, too fast, like they already knew I'd come. The ranger station stood at the edge of a forgotten mountain town called Millrest, a place with 1 bar, 2 abandoned gas pumps, and homes that leaned under their own memories. Locals barely made eye contact. They acted like I had arrived to dig up something they'd buried. The older woman who managed the station keys pressed them into my palm without a smile. She kept her voice low as she said the trails up near the North Rim should never be walked alone. When I asked why, she just stared at my boots and whispered that the mountains remember what belongs to them. On my first night, rain crushed the roof like a giant hand, and at exactly the same moment lightning cracked. I heard 3 knocks at the station door. Clean, spaced, deliberate. I hurried toward the entrance, but when I pulled open the heavy wood door, the porch was empty. The cameras above the doorway had motion lights, but they didn't flicker at all. I checked the feeds, thinking maybe someone hid under the roof overhang, but the footage showed no one, not a shadow, not a footstep, nothing. I tried to sleep, but the storm kept flashing white light under my doorframe until dawn, and the knocks played again in my memory, so steady they sounded like a warning. I didn't know that was only the first sign. 2 days later, I hiked deeper into the reserve to inspect a restricted zone that records claimed hadn't been touched in 40 years. The forest changed color there, like all the green had been washed out and painted back wrong. The air carried a damp sweetness. The pines grew too tall and too thin, their bark peeling like old paint. Under one of the trees, half hidden by fallen needles, I found candle wax pulled clean and pale as bone. It was fresh, still soft under my glove, and even worse, there were fingerprints pressed into it, small ones, like a child had handled the candle just hours before I arrived. That zone should have been empty. No hikers ever registered going that way. No trails led into it. My radio hissed every time I tried calling the station. The air had a faint hum to it, like a throat clearing in the dark. I collected the wax, noted the coordinates, and forced myself to keep walking. The deeper I went, the more the shape of the forest didn't feel right. Paths seemed to waver when I looked at them too long. Branches looked curled in the shape of reaching hands, and old ranger markers were carved with warnings that didn't appear in any official logs. Things like, "Do not answer if it calls your name," or "She walks when the hour breaks." Later that afternoon, I found something stranger. Between two mossy rocks lay a photograph, old and sun-bleached. I picked it up carefully, brushing dirt off the glossy surface, and my whole body went cold. The photo showed me standing near the North Rim lookout, wearing my ranger jacket, but the problem was simple. I had been working here for only 3 days, and I had never been to that lookout yet. Even worse, someone tall and blurred stood behind me in the picture. Their shape looked half turned toward me, half turned toward the trees. The exact spot in the photo still existed. I recognized the broken railing. I checked the timestamp written faintly on the back. It was dated 5 years ago. Before I ever set foot in No Rest. Before I ever put on a ranger uniform. I felt watched from the trees, not by a person but by the land itself. That night, the storm came back. The wind bent the station windows, and rain raced across the roof. At exactly the same time as before, 3 knocks hit the door again. Slow, hollow, hollow. Sure, I froze where I sat. I didn't go to the door this time. I watched the cameras on the monitor, but the feed showed the empty porch again. No rain hitting the steps, no shadow leaning in, no movement. The knocks kept happening every stormy night from then on, each time with nothing visible to explain them. My job required me to patrol deep trails, and I used that as an excuse to check Vincent's last known path. He had been hiking in a remote section called Bracken Ridge, a place where the fog clung to the ground even when the sun burned overhead. His last entry in his field notebook said he heard humming underground. I thought he meant water tunnels. Now I wasn't so sure. 4 days into my search, I found a small cabin crushed under fallen branches. It looked abandoned for decades. The roof sagged like a broken spine. Inside, I found carvings on the walls, names scratched deeply, some crossed out, some unfinished. In one corner lay a shredded sleeping bag stained dark, like something heavy had been dragged across it. My breath caught when I saw a tiara lying near the hearthstones. Cheap plastic, bent slightly, but still glittering faintly. It reminded me of the rumors I had read from old missing person reports, stories of a girl who vanished while wearing a silver tiara during a family hike. Her body had never been found. Her case was buried in the archives, barely remembered. I didn't touch the tiara. I backed out of the cabin slowly, as if stepping on the wrong board might wake something underneath. The next morning, I woke to claw marks outside my station cabin. 10 long furrows dragged through mud, as if someone had been pulled backwards, struggling for their life. At the end of the claw marks lay one ballet shoe covered in black moss. I felt sick. Every night after that, the woods whispered. Not loud, not clear. Just enough for me to feel like someone walked behind me every time I patrolled a trail. When the wind moved through the branches, I swore it shaped itself into words. take your place. Still, I kept searching. One afternoon, while checking an old shelter near a ridge, I saw something etched into the wood that made my legs go weak. My name. Not Rowan Hale. My full name, middle initial and all. Below it, a date. The date was today. A second line scratched beneath it said, "Buried him in the sleeping bag, just like the others, she is next." I read it 3 times slowly, each word sticking to my ribs like cold needles. I didn't know if the message was carved by someone trying to scare me or by something else, something that had already decided my ending. I pushed deeper into the ridge, following Vincent's notes even though they twisted into nonsense near the end. The forest grew darker, the trees leaning inward as if forming ribs around a giant throat. The air felt warm and damp, but not like sunlight, more like breath. When I found the cave, I didn't need a map to know it was the same place from Vincent's last entry. The mouth of the cave yawned like a creature caught mid-sleep. I stepped inside with only my flashlight, feeling the beam flicker as if the darkness was swallowing it. I found bones inside. Not scattered, arranged. Lines of ribs like arrows pointing deeper, vertebrae laid in circles. Skulls turned toward the walls like they were trying not to see what happened next. In the deepest chamber, I found him. Or what was left of him. The bones were tied at the wrists, with old cord buried halfway into the stone floor. Fingernail scratches scraped the rock around him, deep and desperate. I felt the cold hit my feet first, crawling up my legs. Next to the skeleton lay Vincent's notebook, open to the last page. The final lines read, "It is not a cave, it is a mouth, and it has not finished eating." I turned to run, but the way out had vanished. What had been open rock was now soft, pulsing wall, warm under my hands. The air pushed in and out like breathing. Something moved at the edge of my flashlight beam. A shape shifting each time I blinked. Sometimes it looked like Vincent. Sometimes like a woman I'd never met. Sometimes like me, only smiling with too many teeth. I don't remember blacking out. I only remember waking outside the cave with dirt in my mouth and blood on my hands. My pack was gone, my radio gone. The forest was too quiet, like it was waiting. When I stood up, the wind carried a whisper, soft and scattered. "Rowan, leave your skin. Join the rest. Make the hollow full." Hikers passed me on the trail as if they didn't see me at all, like I wasn't solid, like I was fading into the mountains that watched from every shadow. Tonight, as I write this on a torn map I pulled from a hollow tree, I hear the knocks again. But they're not on the station door this time. They're on the walls behind me, slow, patient, hungry. The mountains do not keep the dead, they remix them. They wear their memories like clothes. They look through their eyes. They whisper with their voices. If you hear them calling your name, it's already too late, because the ghost you fear might not be a ghost at all. It might be you. I stepped into the deep woods carrying a ranger badge I no longer felt worthy of, but searching for something no training manual had ever warned me about. I am Felix Hale, once a field ranger under the Northern Timber Watch, a quiet division that patrols the old-growth forests near the Black River Basin, where our main duty is to locate missing hikers and report strange land shifts after storms. But I was suspended after what happened during a disaster response drill along the Western Ridge. One mistake. One error spoken on a radio line during an evacuation call. I thought I understood. It should have been a simple message to guide trapped volunteers to safety, a calm signal to tell them which route was clear. But something else answered. A hiker fell during that moment. His face bled from the eyes, his jaw locked tight in a silent cry, as if something inside his throat crushed inward, not broken by impact, but folding as if rejecting air itself. The report later called it a freak accident. The department called it a slip of protocol. I called it something else entirely. I knew I had triggered something I did not understand. I traced the origin of the strange radio interference to field notes kept decades ago by an old ranger crew, a group that hiked these hills back when only dirt paths existed. One note mentioned a place they feared, a hollow known only as the Valley That Swallows Voices, hidden somewhere in the northern timber stretch. A place where echoes acted wrong. A place where sound bent in ways that did not belong in nature. That was enough for me. I cashed my small savings, packed my uniform, and walked into the forest alone. The woods greeted me with a silence that pressed against the ribs like cold hands. My first nights passed with an uneasy stillness. No owl hoots, no insects humming, only the gentle snap of branches shifting like bones rubbing against each other. On the third night, I found the burned stump. Wide, sunken at the center, the bark fused by heat that must have been intense enough to melt rock. At first there was no sound. It came slowly, like a breath brushing the curve of my ear. Then it rose. A low, hollow moan like wind dragged through a rusted pipe but shaped into something nearly human. I walked toward it. The sound sharpened. It sliced the quiet like metal scraping tile. When I turned away, it stopped. I circled the stump. No breeze, no vents. Only earth, rot, and the smell of something old. My boots shifted loose soil at the edge. The ground had been disturbed, fresh. I dug with bare hands, tearing skin against roots. The dirt was shallow, only a few inches deep. And under it lay the curled bones of a child, knees pulled tight to chest, throat crushed inward, jaw sealed by hardened resin. I should have left that moment. Instead, I whispered a ranger's last call right we sometimes speak over bodies found after nights lost in the cold. I spoke out of habit, not faith. But the wind responded with a soft chuckle far off to my left. The sound was real. I felt it in my teeth. The next morning I packed and walked 10 miles without stopping. The woods felt unfamiliar even though I patrolled them for years. Every clearing felt colder. Every path looked older. I ignored the strange arrangements of branches tied into odd shapes at my camps. I had work to do. I had to find that valley described in the notes. On the 6th day, I heard someone call my name. It came from below the ridge. Felix. Drawn out, soft, perfect. Too perfect. A real echo bends and shifts when bouncing across hills. But this voice never changed. It repeated exactly the same way every time. It pulled me down the slope. At the bottom of the ridge lay a gully filled with wet leaves and scattered bones. At first, I thought they belonged to deer. But then I saw a backpack. It was a ranger issue bag, one we gave to rookies. A man rested against a tree, eyes wide, mouth frozen in a scream that never finished. His shirt was soaked in dark stains, though no wounds appeared on his skin. I leaned closer. His throat had no vocal cords. They had been removed cleanly, like a surgeon had done it with steady hands. I checked the backpack. Inside was a hand-drawn map with one red mark drawn over the exact spot where I stood. That night, every crack of a twig behind me repeated my name. Felix, always behind, always close. I never saw anything. I kept walking, counting steps to steady my mind, whispering small tasks to remind myself of reality. On the 8th day, my journal scribbles made no sense. I marched fast, slept in short bursts, ate almost nothing. I found symbols carved into birch bark that matched the marks in the old notes, twisted spirals, open mouths without tongues, lines resembling stretched throats. I dreamed of being pinned beneath a stump. When I woke, dirt lined my nails. I had not slept near any soil soft enough for that. My palms hurt from crescent-shaped cuts. I kept going. A few miles later, I discovered the ruined tent. It had been slashed open, not by claws, not by panic, but by 4 horizontal cuts, spaced evenly like someone measured them carefully. Inside lay a soggy diary. Pages smeared with rain and mold. Only one entry remained clear enough to read. I gave the body to the forest. It accepted. But now something seized through my eyes. A later note, written in the same shaky script, read, "I no longer know what part of me is mine after listening too long." There was no body nearby, only tufts of human hair caught on a branch and a shredded ranger jacket tossed into the mud. On the 10th day, I tried speaking aloud to steady myself. My voice cracked, barely forming sound. My throat felt tugged from inside. I reached for my water bottle and found it empty, though I was certain I filled it at the river that morning. Or had I? My boots were tied in knots I never used. My sleeping bag was folded in a pattern meant for search and rescue signals. I had no memory of doing any of it. I placed small offerings out of desperation, old ranger items we sometimes leave on memorial trees, broken compass pieces, wax from emergency candles, a strip from my uniform sleeve. Nothing eased the presence pressing against my thoughts. The hollow moan returned. Not just from stumps now, but from the canopy, from the dirt, from cracks and stone. The whole forest breathed with slow, patient hunger. On day 11, I reached a glade surrounded by towers of stone stacked in perfect columns. In the middle lay shattered mirrors angled toward the empty gray sky. One tiny shard caught my face. It was smiling. I was not. I stepped back and tripped into a shallow pit. It was filled with ashes. Charred pages clung to the roots of an old fallen tree. One page read, "The earth takes voices. The sky refuses. An echo is memory refusing to die." My chest tightened. My breath shook. That night, I whispered a broken version of a ranger radio call, one I hoped would lure whatever stalked me. And it answered. Footsteps circled my tent. Slow at first, then dragging. I peeked through a small tear in the fabric. There was nothing walking outside. Nothing casting a shadow. But then my own shadow walked past. I froze. It came back again, drifting across the trees, my outline visible but wrong, its arms longer, its gait uneven. In its hands, it dragged something small wrapped in a jacket. I swallowed hard. My mind told me not to scream. The forest had eaten too many screams already. When I ran from the tent, I found myself surrounded by the mirrors again, each showing me from different times of my life. One showed me years younger with a clean uniform. One showed me kneeling beside a body. One showed me laughing at a campfire. But none matched the me standing there, breath shaking, fingers trembling, heart twisting. I fled into the night. The paths repeated behind me. I walked trails I never recognized. I found new stumps, each hollowed, each making strange sounds that tried forming words. Some whispered names I knew from missing ranger reports. Some whispered the names of hikers lost decades ago. Each stump held a different cry. I stumbled into a cave near a ridge and slept inside, though sleep felt more like drifting in and out of thoughts that did not belong to me. In my dreams, rows of mouthless faces leaned toward me, humming broken songs in reverse. One face had my badge pinned where a mouth should be. Inside the cave, in the deepest corner, something else waited. I heard a faint tone like a dying alarm. A cell phone lay on a rock. Screen cracked. Battery at 1%. It belonged to a ranger who vanished many years before my time. His name tag had been found only once, caught on a tree root not far from here. The phone buzzed one last time and played a voicemail that sounded like breathing pressed against metal. On the 13th day, I tried leaving. My compass spun. My GPS blinked no signal over and over. Trail markers changed shape behind me. White blaze marks turned red. Red turned to spirals. I walked in circles until the world felt like a closed fist around me. Every night, a new tent appeared beside mine. Same 4 slashes. Same emptiness inside, though the smell of blood and incense hung heavy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated faintly at night, as if something deep underground stirred. By the 15th day, I doubted my memories. I forgot the sound of my own voice. When I tried humming a small tune my mother taught me, only air hissed from my mouth. I wrote small notes in the dirt to track my mind. Every time I looked away, the words changed. I begged the forest for direction. The wind hissed, accepted in a tone that throbbed through my jaw. I pleaded for a sign. The mirrors grew from the ground around me again, each one shifting into scenes of old ranger rescues I once handled. Each scene ended with loss. Each ended in blood on my hands. On the 16th day, I woke inside a ring of large stones. Around me lay offerings, burned ranger hats, compasses torn apart, emergency whistles bent into strange shapes, old forest manuals blackened by fire. In the center sat my own journal. I picked it up. The last page was not mine. The handwriting curved in long loops that looked almost like roots. It read, "You gave the woods a new language, and now it speaks with your voice." I walked until I found a road. The sound of tires on asphalt felt unreal. An old couple hiking with their dog passed me and nodded politely. I tried smiling back, but my face tugged strangely, as if the skin no longer knew what shape it should hold. I made it to a ranger station. I collapsed on the porch. They said I suffered dehydration, exhaustion, and signs of extreme stress. I told them I had been sending out emergency calls. They found my journal, but every page had only circles and twisted lines. No words. No notes. Only spirals. They kept me for weeks. I did not argue. Sometimes in the vents, I heard faint moans like those stumps entering the building. Sometimes I heard my name trailing down the hallway, repeating in the same perfectly steady tone the echo used in the ridge. I never slept in true darkness again. I stayed under lights. I lived in small rooms above crowded streets. But even there, on quiet nights, I heard faint breaths in stairwells or hallways whispering my name from behind me. One evening on my way home, I passed an old drain tunnel. A soft howl drifted out, slow and lonely, sounding like wind through bent metal but trying to form a word. Another time, while walking past a music shop, I heard the same hollow moan through the pipes of an unplugged organ, even though no one was nearby. I have stopped looking at mirrors. I know what they would show, not the person walking. Not the ranger who came back. The woods did not punish me. They consumed me. They turned my slip of protocol into an opening and my curiosity into a doorway. I was never meant to guide lost hikers. I was meant to feed something old and starving for voices scraped raw by fear. I no longer fear silence. I fear the echo.